my fellow Americans is the most patriotic thing you can do. So please, if you haven't gotten vaccinated, do it. Do it now.
US President Joe Biden is pushing Americans to get vaccinated as the country misses the July 4th vaccine goal. Hello, I'm Nathan King, sitting in for Anand Naidu, and this is The Hit. Hello again. Earlier this year, US President Joe Biden set an ambitious target of getting 70% of all adults in the country to get vaccinated, at least one shot, by the 4th of July, Independence Day. To his credit, Biden got close. 67% of adults got at least one shot, as in many parts of the country are also going back to normal too. The president's handling of the pandemic is being praised by much of the population. A recent poll showed that 62% of Americans approve of Biden's job tackling coronavirus pandemic. The problem now is how to cross the finish line, as many Americans who have yet to be vaccinated don't want to be vaccinated at all. Another issue for the president, of course, is the perception of what's happening on the southern border with Mexico. That same poll showed that more than half of Americans disapprove of his policies on immigration. To talk about all this, let's bring in our panel. Atiba Madyun joins us here in Washington, D.C. via Skype. He's the president and founder of Party Politics US, an old friend of this show. And Adolfo Franco was here on Friday. He's back already. An attorney and a Republican strategist, also joining us here from Washington. And from New York via Skype, Aaron Marte. Good to see you again, Aaron. Host of Pushback with Aaron Marte on the Grey Zone. And Dan Raviv, a columnist, and he's done many other things with his life too for Newsday. He's here in Washington, D.C., joining us via Skype as well. Welcome to you all. Thanks for giving up time on your holiday. Well, let's start, Aaron, with you. We heard the numbers at the top there. His goal was 70% of adults getting one shot. The polling's pretty good, but he didn't miss his deadline. So what's your view of how the vaccine rollout stands, and what more do we have to do?
I see, a number of problems that were actually outside of Biden's control. First of all, the initial response to coronavirus, it was late, it was poorly coordinated. You have people like Trump not handling it well. You had Dr. Fauci, too, giving people mixed messages about masks, saying one thing about people not needing masks and then going back on that. I think that raised people's skepticism about government claims. Then you have the fact that we have a very dysfunctional healthcare system to begin with. And I just saw a study recently from the Kaiser Foundation, which said that uninsured people were twice as likely to be unvaccinated. So that's a systemic problem.
Even though it's free. I mean, essentially it's free, and people have been told that, but there's still reticence, isn't it? Because every time you go to the doctor in this country, you seem to get a bill.
Yeah, exactly. And also because you don't have regular health care, you're also not a part of the system. So there are people who probably might not even know that it's free for them because this country is so dysfunctional when it comes to giving health care. So I think, there are things here that are beyond Biden's control. I think the job he's done is pretty good, but if we're going to address the issue, we have to look at the systemic problems when it comes to delivering health care in this country.
Atiba, I want you to pick up on that because there is some vaccine resistance out there. Often in the media, there is this divide between red states and blue states, if you like. And some red states, especially in rural areas, have sort of resisted, at least partly, vaccines. But also there is a colour divide, too, where African Americans especially have been a little slow on the take-up. Is that access, but also suspicion as well? What do you think?
Well, from what I'm hearing, it's a little bit of both. But there's this misinformation going on all around the country. I mean, we've heard anything from women saying they don't want to get the vaccine because they're afraid it's going to cause them to have a miscarriage in the future or make them infertile. I've heard other things where people say, I don't want to get the shot because I don't want them to put a chip in my arm. The president,
Bill Gates thing. Yes.
The president has done a really good job, I think, of trying to push this in terms of, especially after we're coming from the last administration where it was politicized about wearing masks. And I'd like to just go back, though. The piece about Dr. Fauci, I believe that part of the reason why don't wear masks, do wear masks was very early on. A lot of it was we didn't know a lot about the science. But the other thing was we didn't want to have such a rush of people going to buy, particularly N95 masks.
Yes, Dr. Fauci said that himself.
Our first responders to have those, and then people in the hospitals. So, in terms of where the president has gone, 67% is pretty good considering he didn't meet the 70% threshold that he set for July 4th, but he got close. And what we see now, it's really interesting because I've actually wondered, had the last president won this one, will we be having this issue where blue states will be having a hard time getting the vaccine while the red states were getting it? I don't know. All of this has really been politicized. It's unfortunate that it's been politicized because we see this Delta variant that has been going on globally, that is now here. Florida has 17% of the cases, another red state. And I think that's what we're seeing around the country with these red states and the not getting it. Now, I did want to say this. You asked about the African-American community. There is a lot of distrust, and there is some issues with this systemically within the healthcare system that COVID has really shown us that's there. So I think you have to figure out now what they're going to have to do is go to the people, not ask them to come to a pharmacy, not go to the doctor, but actually go to the people with information, with vaccines, to try and do this.
Adolfo, and I'd like to remind all our guests that obviously this virus doesn't understand red states and blue states. In fact, it likes the fact when humanity is divided because it's easier to spread. But having said that, I'm going to throw a number at you. 62%, as we said at the top there, pleased with Joe Biden's performance. If you remember, the previous president, Donald Trump, didn't get so much higher marks. Do you think Biden's doing better?
Well, I don't know if he's doing better, but he deserves a lot of credit because of the policies of the previous administration. You know, it's funny how this analysis of politicization only goes one way. Last year,
well, it depends who's in power.
well, last year when President Trump was president, there was a lot of attacks on him, and in fact, the current vice president said she wouldn't take the vaccine if Donald Trump said to take it, and now we're supposed to take it because Joe Biden says it. So this politicization is regrettable, but I will say a couple things. We wouldn't be here with Operation Warp Speed. We wouldn't be here because of President Trump that we're having the success on this administration that's only 6 months old. I will say this. I don't care if he didn't make 70%. I'm glad the direction the country is going, and President Biden should be the beneficiary of this. However, a lot of excuses here are being made. Everyone knows this is free. There's just a lot of resistance to this for a lot of reasons. There's an echo chamber in the internet. A lot of people, it isn't just Republican or Democrat, it's people that just don't believe in vaccines. And that's just some of the resistance. At the end of the day, we're pretty close to the herd immunity number, which is supposed to be around 70%. And I think the indications are that other than pockets, it will be fine. But this political analysis, I take exception with. Everything President Trump did was wrong, and everything Joe Biden does is just perfect. I don't buy it. Thanks to President Trump, we are where we are.
Yeah, and anyone who lives with a husband and wife knows that's just impossible. So, or wife, Dan, you have a very long experience in the international perspective. Israel, one country you've dealt with very closely, has had successes, although pushbacks because of the spreads of variants. In the UK, they've vaccinated 85%, I think, of most adults have had at least one shot. They're about to whip off their masks and declare freedom on July 19th. But there is still this worry, isn't there, that these variants, it's very early, the vaccines seem to be working, but this virus mutates. What's this payoff, both here and also internationally, for your perspective, on this sort of freedom versus protection?
Well, indeed, every government, certainly in the democracies, wants to reopen, right? People, especially here, the American people, this is the 4th of July holiday weekend. People wanted to be together and go to football games and baseball games and parades. We saw it everywhere. And then they got the news that President Biden failed to reach what you said was the 70% goal, 70% of American adults. Well, they got to 67%. It really is quite close. It's 172 million Americans who got at least one shot, one jab. It should have been 182 million. So, Nathan, you know as well as I, when a president sets a goal or makes a promise, well, he probably shouldn't have done that because it looks like a failure. But the fact is, I don't know how you're going to persuade many Americans who think that the vaccine may not be safe and they don't like to take any orders from the government. I keep hearing that from people who proudly haven't gotten the shot. They say because nobody's forcing me to.
There's also this worry about, the fact that it was rolled out so quickly, isn't there, Aaron? I mean, it's a success of science, but also people are a little dubious of a vaccine that takes 1 year to develop, although it seems to work. And then there's this idea of variants. The Delta variant, as it's been named, seems to be much more transmissible. Are we at a crossroads, or should we be thinking about this differently? I know you think about things differently, so that's why I'm asking you.
Well, again, I keep coming back to the failure of this country to provide health care for its citizens. And that engenders a culture where people are naturally more paranoid of their government and what the government says, because we're being told always the government's not the solution, it's our enemy, we can't trust anything
But why
it
don't
says.
people just trust science? I don't get it. I mean, there's lots of stuff out there. I mean, there's disinformation, but all you have to do is sort of, read sort of trusted stuff, and these things generally work better than not having it, right?
I got it. What I'm saying is I think people would be maybe more prone to trust science if science was a bigger part of their lives. And a big part of people's lives could be if the government was giving them health care. The government was a part of their life, caring for them. Wow. But it's not. So I think that it's not the sole problem here, but I do think it helps breed this sort of conspiratorial paranoid state where people don't know who to trust. If they had a regular relationship with their government in their lives, which they should because they pay taxes to it, and we're all living in the same society, and we provided for everyone's basic needs, I think that would help reduce the mistrust here.
Adolfo, do you think that's it? Because obviously you're a Republican strategist, and there has been this big debate about Medicare for all, etc., a single payer system for the last 10 years. Do you think the US has a unique problem when it comes to trusting a healthcare system which seems to be based sometimes more on dollars than on common sense?
Well, I think we have the best health system in the world, and that's why I see foreign leaders and all kinds of people from socialized medicine, I'm talking about first world countries, coming here for medical care. So I think this is a canard. The worst thing that could happen in this country is government takeover of health care. I have never seen government be efficient in anything. The reason that FedEx exists today and DHL is because the post office was unable to deliver and ultimately was the private sector. The same thing happens here. That doesn't mean the healthcare system is perfect, but the distribution of a poor healthcare system, which is what happens, as former Prime Minister Cameron said, you have to have your head examined if you're going to change the system in the U.S. to a socialized medicine. I think it'd be a colossal mistake.
But it's a good time to re-examine the system, isn't it, though? I mean, when you have a pandemic like this, isn't it just worth it rather than just sort of carrying on as normal?
Oh, we're at 70%.
Yeah, but there was a rapid spread, for example, where other countries didn't necessarily have that. So these things are always worth re-examining, whether you're whatever your political agenda.
But we've been a tremendous success compared to most countries in the world where we are. Well,
including Europe. 600,000 dead, sir. I mean, that's not.
Yeah, but where our vaccination, our vaccination's almost at 70%.
Well, I mean, it's not fair to memory of 600,000 people. You say you've done a great job.
Well, I think it has been.
It's a scandal that we're supposedly the richest country in the world, but we cannot supply health care to our own citizens. And
we do.
There are people in this country who certainly benefit from this healthcare system and would consider it the best. But there are tens of millions who don't have health care because they can't afford it. And they're priced out of receiving Medicaid or Medicare. So the question is a country meeting its most basic requirement as a society, which is meet the basic needs of all its citizens? And when you have tens of millions who aren't insured, and you have a disproportionate death toll compared to the rest of the world, even though we're the richest country, there's a problem here.
Yeah, I think it's a very good idea for another heat show, actually, comparing different systems and how they reacted around the world. Sorry, I have to move on. Atiba, let's move to a less controversial subject. President Trump, former President Trump. No, I'm joking. He had a rally last week. The American election cycle, as you know, never stops. Is he going to be a candidate? And obviously his presence is going to be felt in the midterms. And is it too early to talk about it? Should we be talking about it at all?
I think the former president has a number of other issues that are very pressing that are on his plate, and I'm talking about, speaking of what's going on with the Trump organization. But I do also want to go back to just the last piece. In terms of more than 500,000 people died on his watch, and I don't think that we talked about Operation Warp Speed. The science is what got us there. The politicization of a whole lot of those issues are what created a big fiasco. and cost a lot of people their lives, politicizing whether or not to wear masks or not. So now you have the president you have the president back out, the former president back out talking. And yes, he has the brand, he has the name recognition, but I still think that there are Republicans that are starting to shy away from him. What that is going to mean for 2022, I think a lot of what's going to happen in New York and maybe some other places is going to tell a bigger part of whether or not the former president has any standing in the 2022 elections. What I do think, though, is that Republicans, with the voter suppression laws that they have been passing around the country to try to stymie or make it difficult for Democrats and for black and brown voters, is a bad bet. I think that what they're doing is they're betting that black and brown voters are not going to come out in 2022. And I think what they're actually doing is helping to excite the base around Democrats. You're going to start seeing a lot of ground operations like we saw in Georgia with Stacey Abrams, perhaps in Texas with Beto O'Rourke. And that's going to spread around the country. So it's going to be interesting to see how he can counter that against the Democrats' message in 2022.
Adolfo, as a Republican, would you like to see Donald Trump run again? Are you happy that he has so much influence over who gets to run in 2022? Or do you think he's basically holding the party back from getting over the Trump trauma, if you like, in terms of how he stormed across the political scene and essentially changed the GOP forever?
Well, I would like to see him run again, and I think most Republicans would like to see him run again, and I think he will run again, despite all of the obstacles and all of the, really what it is, a political persecution in New York. Not the first one he has overcome, and another one he will overcome this one, and that will only strengthen the base and his appeal. So I think he's a unifying force in our party, meaning most Republicans identify in the high 90s in terms of people who would vote for him again. It's very clear to me the nomination is his if he wants it. There's no question in my mind he will be extremely influential in 22. I think there's a lot of wishful thinking with my friends here on the panel about their fantasies and these laws that are designed to ensure integrity of our voting system will only inure to the benefit of the American people. The Georgia law, for example, is more liberal than the current law in Delaware, Joe Biden's home state. Well, last thing I want to say, though, on this COVID matter, had we listened to Biden, we would never had a China travel ban. We'd still be studying the drugs. We would not have Operation Warp Speed. Thanks to Donald Trump, we don't have 2 or 3 million people dead, and that would have happened under a very slow-acting Democrat administration. That's very clear to me.
Yeah, but you know that's hypotheticals, isn't it? And there are 600,000. 600,000 dead is pretty high, especially when you compare it to the rest of the world, isn't it? So you can't really sort of say that. But look, I'd like to. Well, you know, I understand that, and you make some interesting points, but we have to really bear in mind that, you know, hundreds of thousands of people in this country died, millions globally. I just don't think we can throw around.
Worldwide.
Yeah, I know, but it's really quite sad, and I don't think that their deaths should always be a political talking point. I think we should just always pause.
Well, that would be nice advice for the other side, Nathan.
You know, I lost friends and neighbors to COVID.
So did I, but that would be nice advice for the other side.
You know, I just don't like the idea of numbers of dead being thrown around like that. But you know, perhaps I'm getting into
the Democrats that throw it around.
Yeah, okay, I understand. Listen. You know, Dan, let's talk about Trump's rally just a little bit more. I mean, I thought he did something very clever, which was he got criticized a lot by Democrats during his tenure about the crisis on the southern border, those horrible pictures of kids and being separated from their parents. And he's turned it. He said, look, these kids are being kept in terrible conditions, and, you know, essentially saying, look, if you accuse me of doing this, it's still going on. Do you think he touches Democratic raw nerves and exposes some hypocrisies, especially when it comes to almost an unsolvable problem like the southern border in the U.S., that other politicians don't?
Yeah, I also noticed what the former president said at that rally in Sarasota, Florida. Yeah. You're quite right, but I don't think he's going to win any votes from progressives, liberals, Democrats by pointing that out, but he likes to respond to everything if he thinks of an angle. Basically, for former President Trump, it boils down to Biden is just as bad, he's even worse, and it's dangerous to the United States because the Biden policy is not only causing, according to Trump, plenty of unaccompanied children to be held near the U.S. border in bad conditions, but according to Trump and his backers, all of this is dangerous to the U.S. because illegal immigrants are still getting in. And so he's going to say, certainly as he supports his candidates for Congress next year, and yes, indeed, Trump may run for president in 2024, he is going to claim still the U.S. is in danger from illegal immigration. It's an issue that seems to work for him because Congress is not changing or improving the laws in any way.
Aaron, you know, this debate has gone on in different forms for decades. I'm old enough to remember when Joe Biden was a senator and there was that really close, nearly a deal, which is actually quite sensible, about roads, pathways to citizenship, not having this sort of a massive migration to deal with low-paid jobs and fruit fields, etc. You know, giving people social security numbers, but also, you know, tackling down on illegal operation with both Democrats and Republicans about to pass it in the George W. Bush years, and yet it went away. We're still at this problem. Is it getting worse? Is it getting better? How does it get solved?
Well, look, I think you raised a very good point about the hypocrisy of the Dems as exposed by Trump. I think Trump was a terrible president, but I do think that one of the positives of the Trump era was that he did expose Democratic hypocrisy. They were calling him a fascist and a Nazi for his immigration policies, while they're now presiding over something very similar. Obama deported a record number of people. They built those cages that were keeping those kids. Yeah. Yeah, and now you have Kamala Harris after, when she was campaigning and when she was opposing Trump, she was talking about how immigrants are welcome. And what did she just do? She went down to Central America and told people not to come. So until Democrats can resolve that contradiction between their rhetoric when they're out of power and their actions when they're in power, yes, this situation will not be resolved. I personally would like to see the U.S. take some responsibility for creating the conditions in Central America that caused people to flee to begin with, imposing privatization, neoliberal austerity programs, fueling dirty wars. You know, some of the biggest targets of U.S. dirty wars are now the biggest causes of the migration crisis. So until that's addressed, you'll see this crisis continue in perpetuity.
Adolfo, you want to pick up on that because I heard you bring the comments. You're very good at your sides. Say so much. You're very good at that.
Thanks, Nathan. I hope that what I just heard exactly what Democrat candidates will tell the American people, not the liberal elites and people around this table. I hope that they blame America. I hope they tell the American people that it's the United States' fault that the economic conditions throughout the world, not just in Central America, are causing this economic refugee exodus toward the United States. I hope that is the message.
I said it's a major cause, yes.
I hope they say that, because that is a winning strategy for the Republican Party. The fact of the matter is, Nathan, in 2016, Donald Trump ran on immigration, and that's largely why he became president of the United States. It was over the famous wall. Remember the construction of the wall that's been halted?
Yes, I think you're going to see that.
I think you're going to see this repeat in 24. I hate, as Gene Kirkpatrick used to say, it's the blame America crowd. I hope that is the message. That's the message of the 80s that had landslides for Ronald Reagan. So they'll produce a landslide for Donald Trump in 24.
Okay, just a quick, can you give me 30 seconds on it? Is it essentially the third rail of American politics, like Social Security reform used to be, and no one can touch it without getting burnt, immigration now?
Social Security, I think immigration is the third rail now today, as was Social Security. I really do. I think these images that are coming across with uncontrolled, in terms of our security, drugs, smugglers, the children, all of it is a disaster for this administration, and the polls show it.
Okay, I'm going to change topic. We've got about 4.5 minutes left. Atiba, foreign policy. As you know, Joe Biden came into office and basically promised to be very different from Donald Trump. But if you look behind the headlines, we still don't have a restoration of the Iran nuclear deal, for example. I know many businesses that thought tariffs would be lifted by now and the China trade war might have ended. Let's listen to the foreign minister of China, actually, Wang Yi, recently.
The United States unilaterally withdraws from the JCPOA and exerts maximum pressure on Iran. This is the root cause of the current Iranian nuclear crisis. To untie the bow, the person who tied it is required. The US should correct its mistakes. First, it should fully and completely remove all its illegal and unilateral sanctions on Iran and any third party to meet Iran halfway and make further breakthroughs in the negotiation.
Atiba, is it just Trump foreign policy continued with the sort of rhetoric of multilateralism?
I really couldn't tell you. What I will say, though, I think that we've got to let diplomacy try to work. There are conversations that are going on now. There are negotiations that are going on now as it relates to Iran. What that's going to look like, I don't know. I know the president does want to go back to some sort of an agreement. But I kind of want to also say this. America does have to continue to take responsibility for some of these issues that it has caused. And so I don't think that that's a third rail of politics in terms of when we talk about immigration. But in terms of with Iran, this is, that whole Middle East, that whole crisis. I mean, the president just launched a strike in Syria and Iraq with Iranian-leaning militia against them there. This is a very volatile situation that really requires some delicacy and some diplomacy. And I think that the president, having served on the Foreign Relations Committee, having been a U.S. Senator for as long as he was, that he's the right person to be in place for this. He was the one to help negotiate that 2015 deal. Yeah. So we have to wait and see.
Dan, I'm going to give you the last word because you have a lot of expertise in the wider Middle East. He says he's re-engaging Biden, multilateralism, et cetera, et cetera. However, we have no Iran nuclear deal restoration, and of course, he is pulling out troops from Afghanistan, just like Donald Trump said he would. So, I mean, what's going on here?
Correct.
Well, it's only been 5.5 months, so I didn't expect that the Biden policies would totally replace the Trump tone and the Trump policies, but I think the tone has changed. Biden, in his recent trip to Europe, for instance, absolutely underlining multilateralism, at least try to appear like he's going to be tough on Putin, though, of course, the Biden administration hasn't been tough on Russia in every way. But still, I think it is a big change. It just takes time. As for Afghanistan, it turns out that even Democrats wanted to end the war there, which started just after 9/11 20 years ago. Americans have had enough. It's going to be miserable to see headlines and coverage from Afghanistan when inevitably the Taliban take over again. It's going to be seen as a U.S. and NATO alliance failure. But apparently Biden is willing to swallow that rather than to stay in Afghanistan and in great numbers in Iraq.
Okay, we've got time for just one more. Aaron, I know you have some views on Biden's foreign policy. What about the Iran nuclear deal? Are we close to a restoration, or do you think politically still it's a problem? And the drawdown of troops from Afghanistan, while many of us obviously welcome the end of this war that really lost its way, and tremendous casualties across the region, and of course US and NATO troops as well. It's a real sad ending.
Oh, it's tragic, and it's going to be really ugly. I mean, the Taliban are going to retake territory, and people are going to suffer. There's no doubt about that. The question is there an alternative? The U.S. has been there for 20 years. That war is lost. It was lost a long time ago. U.S. commanders knew that. U.S. leaders knew that. No one's had the courage, political courage, and awareness to follow through with reality now. And I'm glad that Biden is doing that, even though, yes, it will be ugly, but that just has to be recognized. In terms of Iran, the same thing. Does Biden have the courage to return to his own prior administration's nuclear deal and anger a couple of senators who want a more hawkish policy? I hope so. And look, it's an example of the overwhelming power that the U.S. has to destroy foreign countries. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal today about how Biden is going to roll back sanctions. Okay. And they talk about how the U.S. has crushed Iran's economy. Okay. That's what the U.S. can do, and that causes major damage, and hopefully Biden will roll that back.
Well, hopefully we'll invite you all on our Iran show coming up too as well. We don't have any more time, sorry, but I really do like the sides of Adolfo. They're really great. Thanks for a great debate, gentlemen. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Nathan King in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for being with us.